I probably seem immodest, my bosom exposed, my jacket open in this manner. You know, one year, it was at, I believe, Thanksgiving, right before I went to Chicago. I went to Thanksgiving with my friend, or somebody I understood at the time to be my friend. And there were people there. And during the course of being there, they were discussing this group they had, standing up for racial justice, surge. The understanding was it was kind of a form of white auxiliary for the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, white auxiliary has a very specific meaning depending upon what your understanding of American history and justice struggles connected to issues related to racism and capitalism, right? But they called it standing up for racial justice, which was this understanding that it was a duty that white people had to support African American people in resistance to oppression. And the understanding was that it was a separate group, and there were other things that went into that responsibility that were distinct from what was organized within the and under the rubric of Black Lives Matter or other groups of people of color. And this is something they'd been building for years that I had experienced. I was in Chicago. I participated in a group regarding white privilege. It was a study group for white people to discuss their relationship with white privilege as a way to get it through our heads, I think, that there were all of these different things that white skinned people had that were advantages to them, regardless of whatever else they endured. And so it was the responsibility of white people to handle this without subjecting people of color to the processes related to our trauma. But correlating with this, I'm just going to say I absolutely respect separatist spaces. All kinds of separatist space. You have a right, we have a right to self determine and to have space separate and distinct and apart for how we define ourselves, to discuss our issues, and even to politically organize. I absolutely, positively do not believe in separatist movements in terms of political leverage. And I absolutely do not believe in racial or other kinds of demographic hierarchization when it comes to political capital, either acquisition, distribution, or expenditure in the course of a justice movement. I just don't. It doesn't work. And it doesn't actually do the job of challenging the structural hegemony of the material causes of oppression. But with that said, I'm sitting there at Thanksgiving and they put a chair at the table and they put a plate and they put a cup with liquid in it. And it just so happened my friend and the person who was one of the primary organizers are Jewish. They're identified as Jewish. I don't think anybody would dispute they're Jewish. Let's put it that way. Regardless of how many times they've been to synagogue, regardless of when or how they worship as part of a spiritual praxis, nobody's going to challenge them. Their self-identification as Jewish. And they're sitting there and they're talking about how putting that plate at the table is akin to the cup of Elijah. And they've put it there for somebody that they identified and described as being martyred as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. That it was somebody who had been killed in that area, which was Oakland, California. And so they're leaving that space at the table open for him. And he's not there. And it was part of the blessing of the food that involved this. And as I'm sitting there, I start crying. I become very sad. And I leave the table and I go upstairs and I go into the bathroom and I start wailing. I start wailing because they just sat this place at the table. And it's another one of those situations where I'm in a very different sphere. Everybody else seems to think that this is somehow an acknowledgement, that this is somehow a means or a manner in which to acknowledge the spirit. And I don't feel it that way. This happens to me. Other people seem to be happy. Other people seem to think that they've done some sort of honor. And it hurts me. I was physically in pain because I felt this longing. The gravity of the injustice was that palpable. I left the table, I went upstairs, I went into the bathroom, I locked the door in the bathroom, I started crying by myself in the bathroom. My friend came up, knocked on the door, and said, "Can you quiet down? It's disturbing us." Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm just really upset about what, he's dead. And, well, I mean, it's a celebration. It's a holiday. You're making people feel uncomfortable. This was in the fall of 2015. This has been happening for a very long time. Somehow, other people seem to think that these moments where they're acknowledging something and summoning or invoking some kind of pseudo religious or actually religious invocation is somehow esteemable and is like a nod to a cultural paradigm. But when you actually feel the pain, when you actually hear them, they're summoning the spirit. What do they expect the spirit to do? Pat them on the back and say congratulations for the name drop? They just described how he was murdered, and because he was murdered, we set a place at the table for that which is not there. What do they expect? Apparently, what they didn't expect is for whatever or however they characterized me to actually feel it as a profound sadness that necessitated weeping, because that was disturbing to the celebration, and that's been my experience for the last 5 years. Every place I go, I don't have access to Jewish ceremony or people that identify as Jewish. Christian, every once in a while, something that has a current of Muslim ritual. If I'm on the streets and I encounter Muslims as part of a procession, they don't have any problem with me stepping in and just standing there silently. All these Christians and all of these other rituals that try to invoke something spiritual as if it's an acknowledgement. Yes, it's just a performance. The actual gravity and the profundity of the real experience of being summoned in the spirit to bear witness. You don't smile and laugh at the martyr who's not at the table, at least not until you acknowledge the pain and the grief. How dare you? Follow me upstairs into the bathroom and tell me I'm disturbing people that are at dinner. This has happened over and over again. I become overcome. I leave. I go somewhere private. Usually because I've been homeless and on the street. It's a damn public bathroom. Somebody has to follow me into the bathroom and tell me I'm disturbing them. And then more often than not, I'm banned for some disturbance. Setting up for Racial Justice is a group here in the United States, but concurrently, I understand there was something called the Surge Plan that was developed in Iraq. It is connected to a specific nonprofit organization that deals with international development issues. However, concurrent to those international development issues and those so-called nonprofit endeavors is also a private security company that announced it had its own surge plan that involved opening branches in 5 cities in Iraq at the same time. 5 cities in Iraq at the same time that nonprofit is presumably dealing with humanitarian development assistance was opening up new positions for a specific role within its nonprofit structure. I just want you to acknowledge that. Are you going to set a place at the table for me? That's a trifecta of surges that has knocked me out. I would advise you not to bother setting a place at the table for me. I don't think the table should be there to begin with.